Welcome to the B2B Thought Leadership Podcast, where we share insights on how you can become the go-to thought leader in your niche. I'm your host, Alejandro Sanoja, personal branding consultant and founder at Latin Empresarios. And today our guest is Joe Frankie III. Joe is a West Point graduate, combat veteran, award-winning author, and he knows the power of a team. As CEO at Joe Frankie III Associates, he now helps companies build better teams. Joe brings 40 years of leading and untangling multiple business projects, up to 8 billion worldwide, and as many as 53,000 associates, where he has a track record of building teams, deploying technology, and mitigating risk. Joe is a mentor, a coach, and a perpetual student, and we love perpetual students here at Latin Empresarios. Joe, welcome to the show.
Alejandro, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Joe, when your name enters a professional conversation in your industry, what do you think are the thoughts and emotions that come up for the people having that conversation?
Well, I think what comes up is seasoned mentor. I'm no spring chicken, and I've been around the barn a few times on various things. So I think people always say that back to me says, Joe, I mean, you're a powerful listener, and you hear what we say, and you're able to understand, what we're trying to convey.
Joe, I want to ask you about that particularly because usually social media and the use of social media, it's associated with people who grew up with these technologies. A lot of people usually are a little bit adverse in the sense of using this technology. And I see that you are on LinkedIn, you use it very well, you've you maximize the platform. What do you think is that element that has made you probably one of the few people in your generation that's actually making the most out of LinkedIn?
Well, I have the advantage of getting on LinkedIn in 2004. So I've been on LinkedIn from the very beginning. So 17 years, and I saw the power of it very early on. For example, when we were trying to find, project people, project engineers for our cooperative joint venture, doing wastewater treatment infrastructure in China. I remember trying to go to some very notable retained executive search firms to try to find these key people that had already worked on projects in China and were familiar with, operating in China. And so, sometimes they come back to us after 6 months. Well, we couldn't find anybody with your criteria. Well, what I learned was I could go on LinkedIn and I could find these people or find some people and then get several referrals, from other people that said, hey, I know Billy Bob and, Janet Ray, and they worked in China. You might want to call them. And so it was very powerful from that aspect. The second thing is LinkedIn started to develop. I was able to help more veterans transition from the military sector into the private sector, because the biggest challenge veterans have is they can't convey what they did in the military in terms that a hiring manager would understand,
Mhm.
unless they'd been in the military. And, that's very rarely the case, given the numbers in America. Only 1% of the total population, has ever served in the military. So LinkedIn gave me the ability to take what they did, suggest, hey, why don't you say this that way? This is what this really means. This is what that really means. And so it would help them just get further along, with hiring managers. So that was really the thing that kind of melded me with LinkedIn back in the early years. Then in the later years, when I was doing retained executive search, when I was doing search business, what I saw was even most executives that really know how to run a company, do what they know best, all that kind of stuff, they did not know how to merchandise themselves to their next
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. In other words, they didn't know how to market or sell themselves to the next opportunity. It's not that they weren't world class or world quality, but you have to convey what you bring to the table in terms of what the search, HR, contract recruiters, what they're looking for. And it's a decision I always tell people. I said, do you want to sit at the front of the bus or do you want to sit at the back of the bus? It's your
Mm-hmm.
choice.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of wonder why nobody's calling you, why this isn't happening and all that kind of stuff. Or, you can investigate and do something about it. And so consequently, when I got in the search business and I started helping people with their LinkedIn profiles and their resumes, then they were getting the interviews and then the word got out. And what happened for me was I was getting calls in the morning and the evening. And my wife finally said, hey, you know, either go back to your day job or find some way to take all this that's happening and, make it, a business. And the second thing she said, Joe, this is kind of natural for you. And I said, well, why do you think that? And she said, all you did in the military was coach, mentor, and develop people. And
Mm-hmm.
listening to you on the phone, that's what you're trying to do is coach, develop, and mentor people. And so that motivated me to write a book called LinkedIn, the 5 Minute Drill for Executive Networking Success with a co-author because I had used her book in coaching many people. And so we put a 1 hour book out there. In other words, it's a certified 69-minute read because, nobody has a bunch of time.
Yeah.
If you can invest an hour in trying to improve yourself.
Joe, so many great points here that I want to touch on, and we could
Okay.
take the conversation anywhere. You talk about marketing yourself, you talk about how veterans have to adapt their stories. I want to explore that. The book, of course, I want to go there. I think we could start with, and I remember this conversation that we had probably 3, 4, 5 years ago. We talked about polishing our shoes. I remember you were giving me some advice on that during that networking event before COVID. So at what point in your career did you realize, because I think what happens to a lot of people is that they think that they just have to work on their skills, on their self as a product, and they think build it and it will come and they will come, right? I'm just going to be good at this particular skill and people are going to notice. And we know that's not always the case. So usually when you're coaching somebody and you see that they're good, but they may not be doing these other activities that are going to help them get higher and keep climbing that ladder, that career ladder, what are the 2, 3, 5 most common mistakes that you see? And what are the typical recommendations you give to fix those mistakes?
Well, I go back to a story that I relate to people. I look at LinkedIn from the standpoint of there's LinkedIn 101, 201, 301,
Mm-hmm.
401, 501, 601. There's PhD level LinkedIn. You don't need PhD level to kind of get what you want. Most people, if they have a desire to use LinkedIn to help leverage them from where they are to where they want to go, that's kind of what I call the cusp of
Mm-hmm.
301, right? And so a lot of times people want me to, go into, very specific stuff and, a large audience. And, I just say, look, I'll talk generally about it and the concepts. And they said, well, why won't you go into it? And I said, look, if you want to put everybody, if we want to take these people, identify them as 101s, 201s, 301s, I'll put them in a separate room. Then you can help them because now they're on a common base of reference and we can talk. But there's nothing that turns off somebody that you're trying to get started with somebody that's asking a 501 question that's
Mm-hmm.
irrelevant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, that really is not going to help them. And then these other people think, well, hey, this thing's so complicated, what am I, what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And so the biggest challenge I see is you have you can kind of use LinkedIn. It's like a crawl, walk, run thing, just like that. So I liken it from to the military people. I said it's like picking first. You pick up a sword. A sword it takes two hands. It's heavy. It's unwieldy. You know, and then you learn how to do some more things and you acquire a little bit better knowledge of LinkedIn. Then you can use it like a saber, and that
Mm-hmm.
means artfully, quick, you know and then you really delve into it. You can use it like a scalpel.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest
Mm-hmm.
problem I see is you have people out there with a sword trying to do an appendectomy. It
Yes.
doesn't go well.
Yes.
So that's why I always think that, hey, pick up the 101 level, use it a little bit, get some experience under your feet, then take it to the next level and all that kind of stuff. But you got people that think, okay, I can go directly from 101 to 301. Well, it doesn't happen well for you. And so consequently, there's a lot of power. You just kind of have to um, strap it on a little bit, use it a little bit, be patient and work your way up. But in the end, if you use it correctly, like a scalpel, like for example, right now, I'm helping a person in a major metropolitan area. They know the three jobs that they want, three different
Mm-hmm.
companies, but we actually know the line number of the job that he wants. And so his mission over the next 18 months is to establish virtual relationships with all the potential hiring managers for that position. Then his next mission is to go and have coffee, lunch with all these people. And in the next 6 months to a year, one of those three positions are going to come open. And the
Mm-hmm.
goal is that he will be a known entity by all the people that will make decisions. And, everybody takes known talent over unknown talent.
Absolutely. And you bring up a great point in focusing on what is it that you need to do next, right? Because I think LinkedIn could be used in many different ways. It could be just a marketing platform where you do inbound marketing and wait for people to come to you, but you could also do outbound and you could do sales if you do it the right way, if you do it mindfully. Because I think what happens
Right.
lately is that there's a lot of automation and people not using it mindfully, and that's why people maybe are not liking the platform. But also on the other hand, a lot of mindful conversations might happen. So that's a great point that you need to focus on what is it that they need to do next. Then in terms of let's say the first somebody like that they're looking for using LinkedIn to advance their career, if we were talking on a one-on-one level, what are the 2 to 3 steps that you usually recommend people to take first?
Well, you got to understand the platform, right? Like, everything has a body of knowledge. The medical profession has a body of knowledge. Oil and gas has a body of knowledge. The HR profession has a body of knowledge. I mean, if you're going to operate intently in any one of those things, you got to know what people are talking about, right?
Hmm.
Uh, I help a lot of people coming out of the military. They say, they want to get in the oil and gas sector, and so I have kind of a small library on my website, and I said, hey, go read these three books that are on my website. Get back to me, and I'll try to make some introductions for you. But I'm going to give you a test.
Hmm. Hmm.
One of the first things I ask them is, what's the difference between permeability and porosity? If you haven't really kind of thought through that, they both talk about something moving through something, but they have completely different meanings. But the point is, I'm not going to waste an executive's time, if I don't vet somebody and you got to do the work. There's work involved,
Hmm.
to get to where you want to go. And so that's kind of of an example of trying to help people network.
Now, at what point in people's careers, or it could be an example of your career, or it can be somebody that you've coached, when do you think you have to make the shift towards focusing on your packaging? Because everything we're talking about here, we've talked about, you just said, like, you got to test them. They have to have the skills. We have to be good at something. If we want to grow in a particular niche, we have to have that skill. But after a while, it's about letting other people know that we have that skill. And at some point, the number of people that knows us has to grow at a higher pace than the people that we can actually meet on a day-to-day basis if we want to be known as a thought leader. So what are
Well,
the typical steps that maybe you've taken or that you recommend people to take so that they can be a trusted expert or they can become a trusted expert in their area?
well, whatever you want to be an expert in, there's going to be a path, right? So, for example, if you're in the oil and gas industry, there's a path. If you're in the military, there's a path. Any kind of large industry, there's a path of jobs. If you're going to stay in that industry, that you can find that out from books. You can find that out from talking to mentors, in that company, or go look at somebody you think is extremely successful, and if they have a halfway decent LinkedIn profile, I mean, all of their jobs from them leaving college, it says, kind of what they did. So you'll find that the paths aren't that much different. But what you're going to see is people were put in jobs and they basically had to produce, right, in
Hmm.
order to get, promoted and given more responsibility. And secondly, go look at their certifications and their education. While they were working that job, they probably picked up courses,
Hmm.
to improve themselves, or licenses and certifications, you know. So, for example, a young engineer, one of the first things they're going to want to do, they just came out of college, they'd want to get their first certification, you know, and the name's escaping me at the moment. And then 4 years after working in an engineering environment, having a couple of things signed off, then they can go take their professional engineering, certification, which allows them to stamp off on projects and those kind of things. And naturally, it's important and it's valuable, right? It's like, lawyers well, a person that graduated from law school, right? I mean, they spend all that time in law school, but if they haven't been admitted to the bar,
Hmm.
they can't submit court documents, unless they're submitting it under another lawyer that has been admitted to the bar. So the key is, hey, where are you going? Have you sat down with anybody and made up a plan, a timeline? you know and it's not that you've got to follow that timeline exactly, but you need a plan, right? And then every year or two you adjust the plan. And I work with people that are going up, and they decide they're going to change sectors. In other words, they're going to leave that sector and go to another one. A typical example here is you have an engineer in the oil and gas sector, and they don't want to wait for the turnaround in oil and gas.
Hmm.
So now they want to package themselves, merchandise themselves, and go to mechanical engineering or aerospace engineering, or even a government type job that is in engineering.
This is the second time this topic has come up, Joe, and I think let's take up a time going into that topic. You mentioned that people need to package their experience, right? If they want to go to a different industry. And then
Right.
you also mentioned that veterans need to know how to explain their experience in the military to a manager, a hiring manager, how to translate that. And it's it's known that communications telling stories, the STAR methods. There are a lot of tools that we have there. What are the typical tools? What is the typical process that you have with people to help them understand how to craft their stories to the person that they have in front of them, whether that story it's a resume and it needs to speak to the hiring manager, whether that story it's an introduction that they're doing in an interview. How do you, what are the typical methods that you use to
So
help
a
people?
story, in my view, and a story can be as short,
Mhm,
as two sentences, right? And it could have qualitative and quantitative metrics both in that one or two sentences. And
mhm,
those are the nice ones. Those are the easy ones to do. But if you've got a story, hiring managers want to, as an executive recruiter, uh, I'm not just somebody has gives me a position specification for a chief financial officer. Well, I'm not looking for a chief financial officer. I'm looking at that position spec, and this chief financial officer's got to solve these four or five super current problems where you can almost see the blood and tears on the position spec. They want somebody to come in there and be able to deal with where they're hemorrhaging, right?
mhm,
You know, and so the key is, you've got to populate those stories. Okay. Now, LinkedIn just gives you an immense place,
mhm,
to populate your stories. Most people use LinkedIn like they're using, above the fold on the front page of a newspaper. They just got a listing of, hey, these are what positions I'm in, two or maybe one or two or three sentences and that kind of stuff. Well, I mean, you can tell, stories. You have up to 2,000 characters under each experience section. That's about 400 words,
mhm,
you know. And so a story is, hey, who, what, when, where, what, and what were the results? And measuring your production with quantitative stuff matters
mhm,
because everybody's a great guy and a great gal, but how do you differentiate yourself, in a story? Well, you either made money, you saved money, you increased efficiency, you reduced man hours, you got the project done under budget, on schedule, all those kind of things, because that's what people like me and HR departments, okay, they're looking for somebody that can solve the problem. Well, how do we know you can solve the problem? Because you tell a story either on LinkedIn or in this specific resume that is built against that position spec. In fact, Alejandro, why don't we talk about the difference between a LinkedIn profile and a resume right now? Because that way we'll not confuse people.
absolutely.
A LinkedIn profile, consider it a warehouse. So I'm going to go to Alejandro's warehouse. And I can go in that warehouse and I can just walk up and down the lines and I can find anything that Alejandro's done. If he's a singer, in the church, if he belongs to the choir, I mean, everything that he did in college and high school, all of those kind of things. There's a place on LinkedIn, to tell those stories, story after story after story. Now, a lot of
Mhm,
people don't. Okay. But if you're going to use LinkedIn, you're choosing to use LinkedIn so people can find you on their needs. So you're in a content war. You're in a content war with your peer, the person that you're competing against at your level. And so do you have higher quality content? Do you have compelling content?
mhm,
Compelling content is a story with quantitative, qualitative metrics. And so, what is a resume? A resume is a one of a kind, unique construction based against a job description or a position specification. In other words, when you get a position specification, in other words, somebody's called you because they found you on LinkedIn and say, hey, Alejandro, I think you might be, a good fit for this. But, they never say that directly. They always say, Alejandro, do you know anybody that might be a good fit for this?
Mm-hmm.
And you say, well, this could be me. And if you decide that, you would say, hey, can you send me the job description or position specification? So once you've got that document, which is 1 to 2 pages usually, it says everything that they're looking for in that job. Then it's your job, if you're going to compete for that, to construct a unique, one of a kind resume
Mm-hmm.
that answers line by line against that. And they say, well, Joe, why do you say that? And I said, because they're going to put it through a machine
Mm-hmm.
along with everybody else, you know? So the, you really want to be specific and you want to come to the top file, because I have a lot of people say, well, I'll just, modify my current resume. No, I say start with 5 blank pieces of paper
Mm-hmm.
and put this thing off to the right, and then you answer the mail. That's what that's about, answering the mail. This is what they want to know about you. The rest that they want to know about you is on LinkedIn. They
Mm-hmm.
got it. They can see it. So, in essence, every once in a while, a resume truck backs up to the Alejandro warehouse,
Mm-hmm.
and Alejandro gets his little forklift, and he goes pulls pallets, and he makes the resume truck full, and the resume truck leaves. So he doesn't use everything that Alejandro's ever done. It's very specific
Mm-hmm.
to what they want. You're delivering, what they want to bring to the table, and the profile is your warehouse of everything you know and have done. And the reason that's important is that's how you get found. Because LinkedIn is a tool about allowing you to be found, basically on the World Wide Web inside, LinkedIn.
So many great points, Joe. I like that. I like that analogy of the warehouse. I usually try to think of LinkedIn as a landing page because all the elements are there. You have the above the fold, like a website with your banner and your bio, your headline. That a lot of people don't know this, but that follows you everywhere. So it's important that you have a good headline, right? Like like your billboard
Absolutely.
that goes everywhere. But then now you even have links because now they added this feature section where you could have a blog post, you could have a link to schedule a call, you could have just everything that a landing page does. You have the social proof area, right, with your recommendations and your endorsements. So LinkedIn is your profile is a powerful tool, and
It's one stop shopping.
mhm, mhm. You could. I actually believe, even though I'm an advocate of websites because of SEO and many different things, and we talked a lot about this during the team, and you probably appreciate this story. But Napoleon talked a lot about how he beat bigger armies because he was able to maximize his resources and the way he organized his army, right? And I do believe that if you are somebody who doesn't have a lot of resources, you are, let's say, a consultant, a solopreneur, and you don't have the time to build a website, you would be better off, instead of learning how to build a website, do a really good LinkedIn profile. And that could be your website because you could write blogs there, you could have call
Yeah.
to actions there, you could have social proof, everything you need, the most basic element of your online presence could be a LinkedIn profile. And then after that, after you have revenue, after you have a little bit more of resources, then you could invest in a website.
It's
So
funny
I
that
absolutely agree with that.
it's funny that you bring that up, because you talked about, I do have a website, but I didn't have a website. And the reason I had to get a website, it was a condition of the publisher
Hmm.
for them to publish the book. They said, Joe, if we're going to publish your book, you're going to have a website, because there's going to be ways that there's changes to the book or something, and we're going to refer, any inquiries and this, to your website. So you got to have a website. But up until that time, I was just strictly using my LinkedIn profile. So my LinkedIn profile was bringing me people that needed, help, because people that were running searches, could find me. In fact, I never intended to be in the international business. and I've had to learn, how to even get paid internationally,
Hmm.
which is interesting in itself, and keeping up with that. But so no, I got contacted internationally, and I always ask person, hey, how'd you find me? He said, well, I ran this search for this and that, and you were the number one guy, or you were the number three guy, and so I sent a note, and we talked, did a relationship, and then determined that I could help them in that particular area, and we came to terms and did it.
Absolutely. And you could also use that as well. LinkedIn, of course, has its own search engine, and there's a lot of SEO that you could do inside with everything that we've talked about. But also, you could change the URL to have it ranked on Google for particular searches. So you could change, I think after a certain number of connections, I don't know exactly, you could change your URL instead of your name, linkedin.com/in/ your name could be something else related to what is it that you do. So that could rank. But and I mean, we could spend hours. We both love this topic, but I want to go back to you talked about telling, being assertive with what you say, right? And some people have this skill, some people build this skill. What is it that what's in it for them? What do you need to tell the other person in that moment for them to understand what you can bring to the table or in any situation? And this is a skill that maybe not everybody has. In your experience, what are some activities? I know, for example, I struggled with English a lot, so I had to work on that. So I did Toastmasters. I did improv comedy for a while to get super uncomfortable with coming up with things on the spot. I volunteered for as many presentations as I could. I started doing video and social media. In when you encounter somebody that maybe you identify their work class, they're really good at what they do, but they don't have this storytelling component yet. They're not as assertive. What would be if you were giving them a development plan? What are your typical 2 to 3 recommendations for somebody to build that skill?
Well, to me, um, we have extroverts and introverts, you know, and what you just described is a thing that you're trying to come out of the box and fix, right? You're uncomfortable, but you put yourself in that uncomfortable situation so that you can get out there and wire your brain so that you're comfortable. So I've worked. I'll just tell you a story. I think that answers it. I was working with a lady. She was probably the most introverted person that you ever saw, and she really brought a lot to the table, but nobody was seeing what she was bringing,
Hmm.
even at work. So we started the traditional way of saying, "Okay, let let's let me coach you on this, and why don't you have a meeting with your supervisor, and make sure, hey, this is what I bring to the table, all this kind of stuff." And so we worked on that. And so she scheduled the meeting, going to go in there. She starts to talk to the guy. And the next thing that happened is she throws up in his wastebasket,
Wow.
and, wasn't a pretty day and all that kind of stuff. And, you can imagine how you feel after that happens.
Hmm.
But the boss was very understanding and all that kind of stuff. And so I said, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take everything that you bring to the table. We're going to build it in a LinkedIn profile, because you know what you bring to the table. I mean, you're telling me. You just got to get it out there so that whatever, and you make sure that all your peers that you're working around, support, what you're what you're saying there too. And no problem, got that. And I said, now the next time your boss sees you, he's going to suggest that that you uh, go to Toastmasters. So
Hmm.
what you want to tell him is that, hey, I've already talked to my coach, and I'm going to do Toastmasters. So what happens is he's going to see that you're proactive. You've already realized, you're doing stuff. You got a coach. You know, you're making an effort. And sure enough, next time he said, "Hey, I'm suggesting that, you might be more comfortable." And he says, "Yeah, my coach told me to go to Toastmasters." And he said, "Oh, great. Well, go ahead." And so she built out her LinkedIn profile and all that kind of stuff, and scheduled another meeting with her boss. And she said, "Look, I'm really uncomfortable talking. I've got to get over that. I'm going to Toastmasters, but I want you to review my LinkedIn profile, so that you can see the contributions I'm making." And he said,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay, I will do that." And he came back to her a week or so later, and he said, "Look," he says, "you and I are going to talk, but I'm going to go around. I saw your LinkedIn profile. I'm looking at the your stories here, your contributions and stuff, and we'll get back together." So to make a long story short, the boss did some check-in and all this other kind of stuff, and came back to her uh, and said, "We're going to consider you for a raise. And oh, by the way, based on your contributions, so and so is going to be leaving, in about a year, and we would like to consider you
Mm-hmm.
for this position." And that's about a year, so you'll have done your Toastmasters thing, and they didn't say she was going to get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she's alerted that she had to, show her stuff, to get the final nod. But the boss recognized her and was able to, give her, a raise based on her contributions.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also, when you differentiated at the beginning that you have to assess if you're an introvert and an extrovert and see what works for you. I remember I love one-on-one conversations like what we're having now.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, and that for me is great. I don't enjoy because I feel you can go deeper. Yeah, you do the small talk, but at some point you can get deeper into good topics and get to interesting conversations. But I feel that sometimes when you do group events, you might not have that opportunity. Yet extroverts love that, right? Because they get energy out of that. I feel it takes
True.
energy from me. So I do think that's a great point to, before you even decide on doing anything else, assess who you are. And I think a lot of people confuse introvert with shyness, and it's not the same. It's just where you get energy from, and then
Hmm.
understanding what is it that you need to do to put yourself out there. um, yeah, Toastmasters is a great resource. Are there any other resources, Joe, that you would recommend? Maybe books,
Yeah.
or how would you recommend? Because I think this is an important point that not a lot of people understand the value of coaching. They think they don't see the ROI. Because it's not something as transactional. Yet once you've had, I played a lot of sports, I've done a lot of training. Now basically anything new that I do, I try to get a coach. I even because of the pandemic, I've been playing some video games, and I even got a video game coach once, just to understand how is it that I can get better. Because somebody that's been there, done that, if they've helped other people, they're just going to be able to quickly tell you what is it that you need to fix. So in your experience, what are the typical obstacles that people have when before starting to work with a coach? Are there mental barriers? Is it just financial? What is it that prevents more people to work with coaches?
That's probably an age-old question, because that goes just as far back as Archimedes and that group.
Mm-hmm.
But in that time, the only source of really information was somebody that knew more. It's not like they could go to the library.
Mm-hmm.
But today, you can go to the internet. There's a lot you can teach your self about. But it's just like you, once you recognize, hey, I'm not growing any further. Okay. So there's a reason that that's not happening. It's probably not your willpower, because your brain is probably doing more of whatever it knows,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not getting you over the hump, right? you know, and it's kind of like what Einstein said, "Isn't insanity doing the same thing over and over and expecting different
Different
results?"
result. Yeah.
So I think if you want different results, you ought to consider doing a coach. Now on the LinkedIn thing, what I always say, uh, it goes better for you if you understand the body of knowledge of LinkedIn.
Hmm.
So people just jump in and start using LinkedIn. There's nothing wrong with that because some people learn that way and just real good. Other people aren't. So the best source I've ever seen on the body of knowledge of LinkedIn is my co-author's book, and it's called "Rock the World with LinkedIn," version 2.1. And what it's done is all the structure of LinkedIn is broken down and defined. So you know what the headline is, you know
Hmm.
what the headshot is, you know what the about section, it's called summary back then. The summary is what should be in the experience section. She has a really good chapter as if you're a woman and doing stuff online. This is the thing that you need to, I'm not a woman, but she does a good job, about that. And so at least you understand all the elements of the field of play,
Hmm.
right? So if you understand the elements in the field of play, now you can start putting them together, you know, to accomplish, what you want to accomplish. And so where I always work with people and is I always ask, where are you? And most people know that because, hey, I'm right here. I'm in this job. Okay. What is it? Where's it you want to go? What do you want to achieve? What is your goal? And, if we can define that, then there's a way to build a LinkedIn bridge from where you are to where you want to go. And so what I consider myself is a LinkedIn architect. I
Hmm.
help you engineer, your bridge. And I just think that uh, knowledge has come from helping 665 people I've coached over the last 6 years. I'm no spring chicken.
Hmm.
I've been an executive both in the military and in the private sector, and I've been an executive recruiter. So I've seen the world and how it works. And what I think a lot of people don't understand is they have one view of what they think. And what I always say is, I'm standing on the other mountain, and we're both looking at the town that's, in the valley. They're on one mountainside, I'm on the other. We don't see the same thing.
Hmm.
And it's important to see what I call the LinkedIn battlefield for what it is. And then it's your job to negotiate it to get from A to B.
Hmm.
Now, some of my coaching might be, okay, you want to be a world class project manager? Well, guess what? You need to get, your PMP certifications, because that's the first thing that, going to differentiate you is those that have it and those that don't.
Hmm.
And all these other kind of things depending on what you're trying to do. So it's not just about building the profile, it's about an approach of what you need to do in order to accomplish your objective. When I was in the Army, I always told lieutenants, I said, as far as I'm concerned, your objective right now is to be the future chief of staff of the Army.
Hmm.
Operate like that 24/7. And then someday you'll decide, well, I want to leave the Army or something like that. No problem. Then leave. But while you were there, you were full on, you know, getting after it, focused.
Joe, something that comes up a lot when people are going down that route of building their LinkedIn profile, putting themselves out there, is facing the fear of sounding egotistical, the fear of self promotion. And usually this prevents them to getting to the next level because it's usually your own, when you share your photos, your videos, your quotes, your thoughts, that's usually what gets most engagement. And then that's how you build thought leadership. So, what are some of the steps you tell people to take? How do you help them overcome this fear of self-promotion?
Alejandro, do you know who Dizzy Dean was?
I don't.
Okay, well, he was a baseball player way back,
Okay.
in the I think 40s and 30s, and he was an announcer when I was a kid. And he was the bane of every English teacher, because he was like the Muhammad Ali of baseball.
Okay.
He was he was always claimed to be braggadocious, self-promoting and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, he claimed that he and his brother Paul, were going to win 45 games that year. So all the sports writers were just eating it up in the radio and all that kind of stuff. Well, he won 30 and Paul won, I think, 17. So, I mean, they delivered, right?
Hmm.
So Dizzy Dean has a quote that I always use for the people I'm coaching is it ain't bragging if you done it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, so the problem with braggadocious is when you fail to use quantitative metrics.
Hmm.
You say, well, I'm a world-class project manager. Okay. And I said, well, okay. I said, I've managed projects too, and part of that's in the lead of the about section, and part of it you read. So I said, over the last 40 years, I've worked multiple projects with project teams of 250 people, and up to $8 billion worth of projects. Okay, so I'm associating that with metrics as best I can.
Hmm.
So the project managers I coach, a lot of their opening lines were, "Hey, in the last 7 years, I've been associated with 7 projects valued from, $2.1 million to $27 million with project teams of anywhere from 2 to 23 people. Where all the projects were done on time and under budget." Okay, so that's not bragging; that's a fact.
Hmm.
Okay, and if you're putting it on social media, guess what? Your peers are going to know whether whether you've done it or
Correct.
not. So
Correct.
don't lay it out there, if you can't back it up. So I always go back to Dizzy Dean. It's not bragging if you did it, but
Hmm.
naturally it's bragging if you can't describe, what you did.
Yeah, that's a good line to keep in mind as a mantra. I also think that people are afraid of repetition and they don't understand that it's only you who see what you post every day, but not a lot of people really know what you do because they don't see all the content. So it's important to not only put your certifications and everything you're doing on your profile, but you have to continuously brand that that word, that identity that you want to have in the minds of people. So whenever they have a problem that you can help them solve, they remember that you can actually help them. So absolutely true. That's another item that I see a lot of people struggling with. Joe, when people ask you, we've talked a lot about how you help people, and I'm sure this is something that also it's on your profile and people can check it there. But when people ask you, let's say you're at an event, you're talking to somebody, and then they ask you, what do you do? What is your typical answer?
What I do is I said I help leaders build a LinkedIn bridge from where they are now to where they want to go.
That's a great line, Joe. Is that something that is that a story, a line that you've worked on and edited? Could you walk us through the process of how you came up with that line that communicates exactly who you help and what do you do?
You have to, whatever you do. I mean, it really takes some work. I didn't get there, you know, in 5 minutes.
Hmm.
This it came a long time, and it came from other people. Other people says, Joe, you sound like a bridge builder because you're saying, hey, I'm over here, and we're trying to go over there, and I don't know how to get there. I'm calling you. And what you're kind of describing is you're telling me I can get there, but we're laying a bridge to get there.
Hmm.
You know, um, so part of it is I'm not smarter than that person. I just hear them and I give them a view that they can now see because they couldn't see the view that they originally started. And so I always tell people, I say, well, how bad do you want to do this?
Hmm.
Because it involves this thing called work.
Correct. That a
you know,
lot of people don't like. Yeah.
I said, and they, I had, so it involves work. I mean, you got to do it. And they said, well, what's it like? And I said, well, imagine, we've all done term papers. And she said, yeah, I've done term papers in high school and college. And I said, well, imagine doing a term paper on yourself.
Hmm.
Okay. And oh, by the way, I'm going to help you structure, the outline, and you've got to fill in the information. You're the library, right? Because I don't know your content.
Hmm.
That's all in your head and in your files, right? And so it's all about getting their story out there, getting it populated, getting the metrics, getting it organized, and then getting in the right places. So a LinkedIn profile, most people use it like above the fold of a front page, but it's a full newspaper.
Hmm.
Okay. It has pages like 2 through 9. It's kind of like the Wall Street Journal. So there's a sports section, an op-ed section, a comic section. People say, well, I don't see that in there. And I said, well, there's other sections. And I said, you can use these other sections to amplify, the things that are important to you. Just like the Wall
Hmm.
Street Journal. You say, okay, this happened in Mexico and it's got 2 lines. Well, if you want to read more about it, you have to go to page 9.
Hmm.
Okay. Because it's got the next snippet that tries to, hey, what are you interested in? And here's where it's at. Well, LinkedIn is set up the same way. And the beautiful thing is LinkedIn doesn't throw this in everybody's face. So people that are worried about being, hey, I have a lot of stuff out there and it's about me. Well, guess what? I'm an executive recruiter. And if I'm looking for somebody like you, I want to know everything about you that I can find.
Hmm.
So how did I get to your page? I put 10 search words up in the search bar on LinkedIn, and you were in the first 40 out of 400 that came up. I'm going to open that first profile. I'm going to look at the background photo. Does it match, the headline? Is the person in the photograph, do they look like they're ready to go to an interview? Is the first 3 lines of the about section, does it have numbers in it? If not, I go to the next person. So I'm making decisions in 12 seconds,
Hmm.
looking at those LinkedIn profiles. But that one that has the numbers in the first 3 sentences, then I know this person knows how to measure their production. So they're valuable. So now I'm going to read their profile. I'm going to take the deep dive. And
Hmm.
so the rule I say is if somebody's in your profile, feed them everything they want to eat. If not, they go eat somewhere else.
Correct. Joe, you mentioned your book. I want to go back to that. LinkedIn, the 5 minute drill, certified read under 60 minutes, because not everybody has a lot of time, right? We want to get it done. At what point, how did the book come up? And at what point would you recommend other thought leaders to work on that? How does a book help position yourself as the top expert or one of the top experts in that field? And when would you recommend somebody? Like, what are the checklist? What are the items that you think are have to be there for to tell somebody, hey, you're ready, you've done all these other basic elements. Now what you need to get to the next level is to write a book.
Well, let me just tell Lori and I story. Okay. So I was using Lori's book that rocked the world with your LinkedIn profile version 2.1. So I use it as a primer. And so I was telling a lot of people to get that, read that first because it'll help them, and then we get back together. So after, selling about 300 of Lori's books, I finally called her up one day and I said, hey, I ought to have a piece of your book.
Mhm.
And she said, why? Who are you? And I said, well, I'm Joe Frankie, and I've sold about 300 of your books over the years. because I use it as a primer text for helping people understand the body of knowledge of LinkedIn. And she said, "Well, who are you working with?" I said, "I'm working with a lot of veterans." And she said, "Well, why don't we write a book?" And I said, "Wow, the first 300 people I coach, everybody was telling me, Joe, you ought to have a pamphlet. You ought to have an ebook. You ought to, have this where we can, get to it." So she and I began the effort, and we finally got it done. And the
Mm-hmm.
hardest thing in the world, believe it or not, is to write a short book.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's at least 173 pages on the cutting room floor. But we wanted to get a book that somebody could get pre-COVID, right? Could get on an airplane that only had an hour flight. They could read the book and be ready to apply it. That was the goal. And we called it LinkedIn, the 5 minute drill for executive networking success, because I had a lot of executives saying, well, I'm not going to use LinkedIn because it takes too much time and all this kind of stuff. So we came up with a methodology where an executive could do what an executive needs to do on LinkedIn, to kind of have a presence
Mm-hmm.
in 5 minutes. And I had a number of people say, this can't be done in 5 minutes. And so I work with one person. I said, if you do it 15 times and follow the instructions, you know, uh, you can do it. And so he reported back after about, two more weeks. He says, you're right. It can be done in 5 minutes, but you can't be doing anything else. I said, yes, you're hustling. But I said, the people that wanted this said they wanted a way not to, be involved in LinkedIn for, half an hour. How do I get in, do what I need to do, and get out? And
Mm-hmm.
so what I encourage people to do is, hey, if you can do it once a day, great. But if you do it at the beginning of the day once and at the end of the day once, hey, that's all you need. And because you can be relevant, you're doing things, LinkedIn, the system, sees you're in there. And so you're getting all the appropriate, attaboys or whatever you want to call it, for being in there and using it.
That's a great point, Joe. And would you say there's a before and after you've published the book? Like, how does that help you position yourself as
Okay.
an expert? And in terms of other people who are maybe thinking about writing a book, what would you say are the elements that they need to have in place before
So
writing
what
that book?
drove me to write the book was I had people kind of looking for something. There was a a demand, and so we were going to try to fulfill, the need, you know, of the demand, and so and we wanted to make it, short and sweet, because what I find is, you know, if you can't say the bottom line up front, this is what you're doing, and then, support it, uh, nobody's really got the time anymore. In fact, I was coaching a person on the person called me up and say, Joe, I want you to help me with my book.
Hmm.
And the first thing I said, well, you know, and she said, wow. And I said, well, do you want it to be used or not?
Hmm.
Is this about your ego, or is this about providing a required tool in your space? So you got to think about it, from that point. What is your mission or goal? Are you just codifying, what you have found, or are you making a recipe that somebody can follow and suggest? And that's not to say that long books are bad. It's just that I wouldn't have enough to say in a long book to kind of keep you interested. And then secondly, as I further develop and have other things I want to do, I'd rather write a second short book on, hey, here's a specific thing that you can do, and here's a short way to do it.
Correct. Joe, this has been a great conversation. I want to be respectful of your time. Anything else any other resource, any parting thoughts, anything else you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah. And so a lot of people ask me, Joe, I mean, I don't need coaching right now, but I need some help on LinkedIn. So on my website, I built a bookshelf.
Okay.
Okay. So JF3 Associates, JFII Associates.com has, slash bookshelf, takes you to bookshelf, and it's like LinkedIn, petroleum, oil and energy, knowledge management. But the LinkedIn link has three books. One, it's got words that sell, because you and I talked very briefly about, we sound repetitious, right? So the
Mhm.
words that sell book is, hey, how do I take words that I'm using a lot and substitute other, words? So it's not a thesaurus, but I mean, it's for salesmen or people that are trying to sell things. Very handy resource, small.
Mhm.
It's a reference book. Then Lori Ruff's book, Rock the World with LinkedIn. She wrote that with Michael, the best primer for LinkedIn 101. There is. Um, and it's easy writ, easily written, lots of call outs, tips and, that kind of stuff. Then our book, LinkedIn, the 5 minute drill. So if you were reading our book and you were having trouble understanding it, I would go back to the primer, because we wrote our book assuming that you would have basic knowledge, of LinkedIn. We didn't try to redefine this and, that.
Well, thank you, Joe. We'll make sure to link to that. We'll link to your profile, to the website, to that, to the bookshelf on the show notes. We'll add those links also on YouTube. Thank you very much for your time, Joe. We might have to do maybe a round two later on when you get questions. Maybe we could go deeper into LinkedIn. Thanks again for being on the show, and for everybody out there, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Thank you for subscribing to the B2B Thought Leadership Podcast. It's our goal to help you become the go-to thought leader in your niche. That's why we do these interviews and we create the content. So if you want more of it, be sure to subscribe to the podcast in all the podcast platforms, and especially subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click that subscription button, click the notification bell, so that whenever new content comes out, you are the first to know about it. Thanks again, and see you in the next episode.